Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program today. It's great to have you all with us. I'm Gregg Ward, Executive Director of the Center for Respectful Leadership. Our program today was specifically designed for you. So let's make sure you are in the right place. So in general, the folks we serve over many, many years are in the human resources, leadership development space, the DE&I space, learning and development and training, and organizational culture and organization development. And typically, the folks who really want to be here tend to be folks who care a lot about their culture and about their employees and making sure that they know how important it is that these issues around conflict, around challenges of collaboration and teamwork and communication, they know that these things really impact the bottom line, and they're trying to help their employees and their leadership understand how important these challenges are. So those are the folks who generally like to be with us and learn from us, and we're happy to be of help to them. Also, these folks like you know that if you don't address these challenges around retention, conflict, collaboration, and teamwork, if you don't address them, they're not going to go away on their own. They're going to continue to be a challenge for you and can only get worse and make a bigger negative impact on the bottom line. So that's what we're all about. That's who we serve today. So I want to make you a promise that in the next hour, I'm really going to give you, like, no kidding, some useful information that you can actually use. I'm also going to introduce to you to a number of tools and techniques and insights that I believe you can put into practice literally the moment this ends. And then at the end of the program, we'll give you an opportunity for some coaching, and there'll be a calendar link in the chat. Darren's going to put that in right now, but also, we'll give you a QR code to access that later on in the program. So we want you to stick around because we're truly thinking you're going to get some real use out of today's program. I also want to thank you for being with us. And if you're able to turn on your cameras, that's ideal and terrific and wonderful. It's easier for me to connect with you when I can see you. And if you'd rather not turn on your camera, I completely understand. No problem whatsoever. So why should you listen to me? Uh, why am I somebody you should be listening to and learning from? I've actually been very fortunate in that I've had a good education. I've had a lot of life experiences and mentors and an opportunity to earn my living focusing on what I'm passionate about, which is respect. And I've been also very fortunate. My book, The Respectful Leader, was published by John Wiley and Sons in 2016. It won an award. It was named Best Book of the Month by Amazon. It became a bestseller. And I'm super proud of it, to the point where if you look over my shoulder, you can see the award is framed on the back wall of my office. I've been doing this work for a very, very long time. I actually started as a trainer for the New York City Police Department way back in the 1980s and learned a lot about respect and how important it is for relationships to go well. I've also been an executive coach for many, many years. I trained at San Diego State University in their executive coaching program. And I also served with the Center for Creative Leadership as an executive coach for nearly 10 years. And I've been serving many global corporations for at least 10 or 15 years, helping their leadership address the same kinds of issues that I'll be talking about with you today. Our clients include ADP, Booz Allen Hamilton, Bristol Myers, Federated Department Stores, Ford. We seem to do a lot of work in the automotive field and also in education and also federal government. And a really fun one was Warner Brothers Studios, where I got to be on the site in the studios, see shows filmed, and I just had a blast working with their leadership at Warner Brothers. Who are we? Well, the Center for Respectful Leadership is a multidisciplinary research, training, consulting, and coaching organization. We're based in sunny San Diego, which is overcast today. Our engagement partners include some of the top learning and development and executive coaches you will find anywhere in the world. We are most famous for the use of live professional theater and improvisation in our learning and development programs. In addition to those programs, we also help organizations create what we call actively respectful cultures. We do that through consulting. We also have an assessment tool that we've created. We also do a ton of research, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. And we also provide alternative dispute resolution and restoring respect services, and also can teach you how to do that within your own organization. Our mission is simple. We are here to support leadership and organizational transformation through the positive power and measurable impact of respect. Now, prior to today's program, I had many direct message chats with many of you on LinkedIn, asking you what you would like to focus on, what you wanted me to focus on. This is what you told us about some of the challenges that you were facing. And so I'm going to brief those with you now. A lot of you talked about friction between individuals and groups and the generations in the workplace, often resulting from both conscious and unconscious behaviors that others find to be disrespectful. Also, we heard a lot from you about stereotyping. There's a lot of stereotypes out there, and we're going to take a look at some of those stereotypes and how they can impact our ability to work well together. Miscommunication is a big theme that a lot of people talked about, that people are listening to respond, but not necessarily listening to understand. And a lot of folks are working in silos and they say, we're good over here, but over there, they're not so good. We're really not interested in their point of view because they're part of that group or that silo. And those can cause significant miscommunications in every organization. A lot of you talked about conflicts between personalities and around behavioral styles, and between groups who are siloed or people who are resistant to change. And as we all know, there's so much rapid change going on in our organizations. It's causing our heads to spin. And yet it's reality and we have to deal with it. And finally, dismissiveness. A lot of folks are saying, oh, those people are like that. I don't want to deal with them. They're too sensitive, or those people are too rude. I don't want to deal with them. They won't listen to me. Well, it's that kind of attitude, that shutdown attitude, which can contribute significantly to all of the other problems that we talked about above. Now, let's dive down a little bit into the generational challenges that we are facing, which is the topic of our talk today. How many of you are aware? Quick poll, you can either answer in the chat or raise your virtual hand or raise your actual hand on screen. How many of you are aware that there are currently 5 generations at work in almost every workplace? There are 5. We have what are known as the silent generation, the traditionalists, same as also known as the traditionals. Those are folks who are born between 1928 and 1945. Now, the memorable events in their lives were the Great Depression. And I see some of you are aware. I've seen the hands go up about the 5 generations. They lived at a time before penicillin was invented and was able to prevent all sorts of infections. The color television was introduced. And now I'm a baby boomer, but I still remember when my parents finally decided to get a color TV. How many of you remember your parents deciding to get a color TV? That was like a Dennis, was that a big deal or what? That was like, let's have a party. We got a color TV.
And I was the remote control.
That's right. Now, baby boomers like me, we were born between 1946 and 64. The memorable events in our lives, including the post-World War II, the boom years in 1950s and early 60s, post-World War II, the Vietnam War coming into our lives, and also the Cold War beginning. Gen Xers were born between 1965 and 1980. They memorable events in their lives. How many Gen Xers do I have in the group? I'd like to see a show of hands. Do I have any Gen Xers here? Okay, I see a few. All right. And let's go back to baby boomers. Where are my baby boomers? Okay, I'm seeing some hands. Okay, very good. And the Gen Xers, the civil rights movement was at its height when Gen Xers were growing up, and also the Cold War came to an end uh, when the Gen Xers were alive. Uh, uh, for example, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. I was a journalist working in Europe at the time. I actually went to Berlin and I covered the fall of the Berlin Wall. I actually have a piece of the wall that I carry with me. And I'd love to show it off when I'm doing keynote speeches and things like that, because it's such a pivotal moment in history. And then there are the millennials who were born between 1981 and 1996. Where are my millennials? Show of hands here. Do I have any millennials in the group? I think we might have a few. And then finally, oh, sorry, before I get to Gen Z, the millennials uh, were born at a time where personal computers were and CDs were being used all the time, and they were exposed to the first cell phones. I distinctly remember as a boomer, satellite phones, car phones before cell phones became ubiquitous. But millennials, basically, cell phones were always around. People always had them. And then finally, Gen Z really got exposure to smartphones. Basically, many Gen Z have never known a time when there wasn't a smartphone. Cloud computing, gaming, and streaming all is part of the Gen Z experience. Do I have any Gen Z folks here? Any Gen Zs? All right. So, one of the big things that we need to remember is that statistically, millennials and Gen Z right now make up 38% of our global workforce. 38%. And in 6 years, all the projections are saying that it's close to 60% by 2030. So that's an enormous amount of shift in generations in the workplace. 60% of our workforce will either be millennials or Gen Z within 6 years from now. That's kind of mind blowing. That's kind of amazing. And by the way, you may have heard I was recently doing some research about these two populations and their size in the workforce. There was a lot of data pushed out in the last couple of years that said that Gen Zs and millennials are going to make up 70% by 2025. Turns out that was wrong. And I recently found that research that what happened is the research came out by someone who made some incorrect assumptions about the data. And then it was picked up by the news media and all these big organizations who didn't do the research themselves. And then most recently, PricewaterhouseCoopers did the research and they said, no, 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 no. It's not going to be 70% by 2025. It's going to be 60% by 2030. And we all went, oh, okay. Well, that's still a huge amount. I think we will all agree. Now, what are the positive and negative stereotypes? When it comes to the silent generations and traditionalists, they're considered to be, by most people, more conservative with a lowercase c. They are stereotyped to be more loyal to an organization and more respectful of authority and also more old school and resistant to change. These are the stereotypes that are out there. The baby boomer stereotypes is that baby boomers apparently have a very strong work ethic and will work enormous hours and kill themselves. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the stereotype that's out there. There's other stereotype that my three millennial children are constantly reminding me of, and some of my millennial staff are reminding me of, is that I'm truly not tech savvy. I'm not really very good with tech. If I'm having trouble with my phone, sometimes my son will summarily grab it out of my hand and say, Dad, you just do this. And then he'll hand it back to me and say, just do that. Just do what I tell you, Dad. I'm like, okay, okay. He's right. He knows what he's doing. He can handle the phone. Anybody been in that situation where your kids know a lot more about your phone than you do? Do I see a show of hands here? Yes. not uncommon, right? Not uncommon. And also, we baby boomers are told that we're highly competitive and we're career driven. We're always driving to be the best and get to the top and all that kind of stuff. That's a stereotype that's out there about us. Now, Gen Xers are considered more independent. They are in fact, along with the traditionalists, by the way, the smallest two generations currently in the workforce. The traditionals over time there'll be even fewer of them, and the Gen Xers are fairly small in the workforce compared to Boomers, Millennials, and Gen Zs. And Darren, I think, my friend, you call yourself a Gen Xial. Is that correct?
It's an exennial. It's a
Xennial. Xennial.
cusp generation.
You're somewhere. So,
Oregon Trail generation, sometimes we're called.
and so are you independent? Is the stereotype about you is you're independent, adaptable, cynical, and disengaged? Is that true?
Maybe.
Got it. But you also got some millennial traits to you too. You are tech savvy. I know you. You are tech savvy. You can be ambitious. You're socially conscious, self-absorbed. Oops, there's a stereotype. Does that hurt?
Oh,
A little bit? And then finally, the stereotype about Gen Z is they're completely digital. They're very entrepreneurial. They're focused on DE&I, and they lack people skills. Again, these are all the stereotypes that are out there. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to talk about a few others. But in the meantime, here's what we're hearing that the different generations are talking about in regard to each other. For example, silent generation traditionalists can be heard to say the millennials and Gen Zs have no respect for their elders. That's another stereotype that's out there. Or a baby boomer might say in frustration, I'm being managed by someone who's my kid's age and fresh out of school or college. I'm being managed by someone that's 1/3 my age. This is really uncomfortable for me. Baby boomers, Gen Xers might say that baby boomers are way too invested in success and don't have enough work-life balance. And then millennials might say, just because I'm younger doesn't mean I shouldn't be respected, which I've heard my millennial children, I have 3 of them, all have at one point or another said that to me in earnestness and frustration. And then Gen Zs are supposedly say a lot. My company won't give me flexibility to work whenever and wherever. So those are all the things that are being said out there. Those are all the experiences that are stereotypical things that people are experiencing. So I'm curious. If you'd like to speak, just raise your hand or type me in the chat and we'll come to you. What else are you seeing? Who else is seeing stereotypes? And what other things are coming up? What other things are being said? Or you can also type it in the chat. So let me look for a show of hands. What else are you seeing, hearing? Do I have anybody chiming in? Feel free.
Looks like we have some answers in the chat.
Oh, yes. Very good. Let's see. Okay, my boss expects me to stay late, and that's too much. Aha. Aha. I totally get it. So, and is that boss of a particular generation? I'm curious, Chris, if you could respond to that question. And oh, okay. The boss is Gen X. Got it. Got it. And you are not Gen X, Chris, correct? What generation are you?
I'm Gen X, and usually it's the Gen Z that is like, hey, my boss is riding my butt a little too much. And sometimes the words are that's abusive, right? To push me to work so hard.
Yep.
And then the Gen X person says something along the lines of, What do you mean? That's what I did when I was young. You got to do it too,
Yep. Yep. That's
right?
right. You got to pay your dues too. You
You
got
got
to
to
pay
pay
your,
your dues too.
yep.
And so I'm going to ride your butt. You're going to work hard, and then there's this disrespectful banter back and forth.
Yes. Yes. And I also see Mary, thank you, Chris. And I see Mary added to this a level of disrespect of seniors. I think you mean for seniors. That is sad. In other words, seniors are not being treated with respect in this culture in any event. Is that what you're trying to say, Mary? Have I got that right?
Yeah, it is. It's like it's beyond discounted. It's disregarded.
Hmm.
And I'm not speaking as much as myself as much as I observe, though I am would be in that baby boomer age. It's you can't possibly know what you're talking about because you might have gray hair.
Which you just have to laugh at that because you've lived a life, you've experienced so much, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. No, just because I'm not up to date on the latest music doesn't necessarily mean I don't know anything. Um, so what happens is we we push back on the stereotype out of frustration, and and that could cause further breakdowns in our relationships. And I'm also seeing Chris Jones saying younger people assume I'm tech ignorant. My entire work life is tech and statistics. So there you go. I may be, as a baby boomer, tech ignorant and challenged by technology, but there are plenty of people in my generation, that's all they do is technology work. So it's fascinating. And I also, and I see a comment by Yolanda, and I also want to call out Janine. A lot of focus on generalizations of generations used as an excuse. You're absolutely right, or a reason why X, Y, and Z isn't happening. You are so right, Janine. And then I'm coming to Yolanda. Millennials and Gen Z seem to need a lot of acknowledgement and adulation, even if they just completed basic everyday tasks. In other words, I returned a call to a customer. Well, that's your job. Fair enough. Fair enough. There again, that's the stereotype out there is that they need to seem they need a lot of an acknowledgement and adulation. And I certainly know when I started in the workplace, I was treated with disrespect. I was not given adulation or acknowledgement in any way, shape, or form. And to be honest with you, I sure could have used it. I was new. I honestly was just learning stuff. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was treated like crap. And so there was this constant fear that I would screw up, and I did screw up. And sometimes I got fired for it. I'm famous for telling a story. My very first job, I got fired because I screwed up. I was never acknowledged. I was never told I was doing a good job. And the moment I screwed up, they fired me. Well, it was kind of one of the reasons why I don't want to work for anybody anymore, because I don't want to be treated like that. So these are all really, really helpful. And thank you so much. So what I'm going to do in the interest of time is move forward. I want to share some somewhat surprising reality with you. And I think Janine was referencing this too. Generational differences can be definitely and are overblown by the media. They're very easy little pigeonholes that we can put people in order to make a generalization and a stereotype about them. And stereotyping is really the villain. For every person who fits the stereotype, I can show you somebody else who exactly is the opposite of that stereotype. So what we know as responsible adults is that stereotypes can really undermine good relationships at work. And the reality is we all progress through different phases as we go through life. Was I really super ambitious when I was younger? Yeah, I really was, to the point where I offended people with how ambitious I was. I have learned in my life that to keep my head down and do a good job is a better way to succeed at my goals than constantly telling people how great I am and how ambitious I am. And then finally, we all experience diverse experiences and expectations and influences within each of us at all sorts of different times in our lives. Sometimes we don't have epiphanies about what it means to be a human being until we're in our 60s or 70s or even older. So all of these experiences contributed to what makes us unique. And stereotyping only just undermines all of that. So I want to introduce you to 5 shifts that you can make individually and in your organization that will make a significant difference on stereotyping, on conflicts, on miscommunication, all the different challenges that we mentioned before. So let's talk about reflective listening. Most of you, I am certain, are very aware of reflective listening. And I love this cartoon that the dog and the cat are sitting down to have a meeting, and the dog says bark and the cat says meow. And what's important in reflective listening is that when the dog barks, the cat tries to bark back in a way that the dog knows that the dog has been heard, and vice versa. The dog has to meow back to the cat in a way that the cat knows that the cat's been heard. That's essentially what reflective listening is. I state my point of view, and before you give me yours, you say, Greg, what I think I'm hearing you say is X, Y, and Z. Have I got that right? And I'll say yes, and I will feel heard and will be much more likely to communicate effectively and efficiently using reflective listening. Secondly is psychological safety. This is another shift that you can make in your workplace. A lot of you have probably heard about psychological safety ever since Google launched Project Aristotle in the late 2010s, where they studied every team at Google to determine why some teams did remarkably well and others did not. And what they found is that teams with the highest levels of psychological safety, where you weren't ostracized for your differences and your ideas were considered without ridicule, where you felt like you can contribute without being shot down all of the time. That's high levels of psychological safety. Those teams were most likely to succeed and achieve their goals. It's the teams with the lowest levels of psychological safety, where people felt like they were at risk every time they opened their mouth. Those are the ones who did consistently worse in meeting their goals. So how do you create psychological safety in your team? Well, you ensure that everyone feels welcomed regardless of their generational differences and the stereotypes people have about them. If you welcome everyone on your team and welcome their ideas and don't summarily ridicule them or say, oh, you're too young to know about those things, or you're too old, you don't know about those things. If you accept that each one of us has something to bring to the table, regardless of who we are, where we come from, what generation we are, this is going to create a higher level of psychological safety. This means that the youngest generation, Zer, and the oldest traditionalists are equally valued and listened to and respected within your team. Next, acknowledging upset and emotions using something we call the H.E.A.R technique. So how many of you have had someone in your office who's either super angry and yelling or is breaking down in tears? I should see almost all the hands go up at some point. True, we've all had situations at work where people have been very, very emotional. Does it make us feel happy and contented? Absolutely not. For most of us, emotions can be very uncomfortable. So what do? We tend to grow silent. We tend to not to acknowledge the emotions, or we ignore them, or we try to tamp them down and say, there, it'll be okay. Or calm down. Have you ever been told to calm down when you're upset? If you have, I'm saying Kim is shaking her head. It's going, you don't calm down, do you, Kim? You get people tell you to calm down, you get more upset, right? So We have a technique, we call it the H.E.A.R technique. It's a really, really simple technique. The H stands for hear the E, emotion. Hear the emotion in somebody's voice or look for it in their body. They'll let you know. It's really obvious when someone's yelling and someone's crying. It's really obvious that they're upset. Now, the A stands for acknowledge the emotion. Basically, say to them, I can tell you're upset. I can see you're frustrated. I understand how upsetting this can be. When you acknowledge people's emotions, and psychologists have been telling us this for years, and they actually use this technique in psychology. When you acknowledge someone's emotions by simply saying, I sense frustration, I sense upset, I can tell you're frustrated, I can tell you're angry. When you use words that explain the emotions that they are feeling, they actually, a part of their brain goes back into the neocortex, which is the thought center of the brain. When people are emotional, they're not in the thought center of their brains. They're in the primitive center of their brains, their reaction center, the fight, flight, freeze center of their brain, also known as the amygdala hijack. You've often heard of that phrase. So that's what happens when people are upset. They're not thinking rationally. So when you acknowledge their emotions, using the language that equals the emotion, upset, I can tell you're angry, I can tell you're frustrated. When you use those words, the neocortex kicks in and they will calm down of their own accord. They feel heard, they feel understood. So in future, what I want you to try to do is acknowledge people's emotions. Try not to tamp them down, try not to ignore them. Just say, I can tell you're upset. I would be upset too. You can use empathy if you'd like. There's nothing wrong with that. And the R stands for respectful remarks. What are respectful remarks? Basically telling someone what you respect them for. Usually it's in the area of their knowledge and experience, their talents and skills, or the way they treat you and other people. So when someone's upset in my office, I might say, I can tell you're absolutely frustrated and angry and upset about this situation. And I want you to know that I respect you for your knowledge and experience that you bring to this organization. And I really value your perspectives. And I can understand how upsetting this is to you. But you're a part of us. And we're going to work this out together. I guarantee you, if you use respectful remarks and talk to people about what you respect them for, even while they're incredibly upset, they will calm down. And that's the ultimate goal of the H.E.A.R technique. H.E.A.R is designed to help folks to calm down when they're upset. The next shift you can make is around adopting a coaching mindset. Now, I think we have a few coaches on this call. Is that not the case? And many of you use coaching techniques in your practice as managers. So what is a coaching mindset? Well, let's think about what it's not. If you think about traditional management techniques, usually managers tell people what to do, or they might say, here's the goal, and here's how you're going to achieve the goal. So managers do a lot of telling. Coaches don't do a lot of telling. Instead, they put on their coaching hat. You might be a manager, and you put on your coaching hat, and you ask permission. Would you be open to some coaching right now? Would you be interested in a different perspective on this situation? And what you're doing basically is psychologically, you're giving them a choice to say, no, I'm not open to coaching right now. And if they're not, that's good. Don't offer it. Don't offer to coach. Don't offer your feedback. Don't offer your perspective. But more than likely, if you say, would you be open to some coaching right now? They'll say, yeah, I am. Tell me what you're thinking. And then you can offer them your perspective. Or you could ask another question. You could say, help me understand what you're trying to achieve here. And it gets them into an insight mindset where they're starting to think about what they're doing in a broader perspective. So coaching is all about asking questions that allow them to gain insights about themselves and what they're trying to do, rather than being a manager and telling people what they should be doing. So every one of us can adopt a coaching mindset. And we find that organizations where managers are wearing their coaching hats more often than not are very respectful organizations, are very insightful. People are coaching each other and they're open to coaching, and it's very, very powerful. You can feel it when you walk in an organization and work in an organization where a lot of coaching is going on. Anyone here want to talk a little bit more from a manager's perspective of what it's like? Have any of you ever been coached by by your boss? Anyone ever had a coach? Yolanda, I'm seeing you nod. Would you mind sharing what is that experience like?
It's been, I guess, empowering in a way, and it's not, I've had a baby boomer boss many years ago, and I've had a Generation X boss who's just slightly older than me. She's on the cusp. And so once they kind of see my capabilities, because I'm full-blown Gen X, I'll let you know I know what I'm doing and don't need a lot of oversight.
I love it.
And that's just who we are. But if there are instances where I may be going into a meeting or engaging with someone at a different level and they have insight on how to handle or the approach and strategy for working with that person, they will provide that coaching to give me not words of what to say so much, but more of the understanding of the landscape of what I'm dealing with, and then to allow me to ask questions or feedback to them what I'm hearing. So, you know, I would say, okay, so my understanding, when you say that this person has this, then I need to be mindful of X, Y, and Z. So when I bring up these matters, I have to be circumspect, or I can be, you know, exuberant, whatever the you know, strategy and tactic might be. So those have been ways in which I've been coached.
Outstanding. And how does it feel?
It feels you know, just as a Gen Xer, it's appreciative because you want to be able to not be micromanaged,
Right.
but to be supported in your perspective on how you see a situation and how you would like to approach something or how you need to approach something. And it lets me know that my supervisor has my back.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And I would venture so far to say is you felt respected by them, even though they might have been saying, hey, Yolanda, you might want to think of it this way. They did it in a way that you felt respected. Is that fair?
Yes, and I also have had that other kind of old school, my way, do it my way. Rule number
Right.
one, the boss is right. Rule number two, refer to rule number one. So I've had that as well.
Yeah. No, it's hard to work for those folks. It really is. Thank you, Yolanda. Anyone else have an experience of a boss who had a coaching mindset, a coaching approach? Anyone have a experience of a boss who didn't have a coaching approach, who was more my way or the highway? Any hands going up there? That's I'm glad to see that no hands are going up. And Jeffrey, do you mind if I ask you generationally, where do you supposedly fit?
I am Gen X.
You're Gen X. And are you like Yolanda, independent? Don't tell me what to do. I can do this.
Pretty much so. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
My kinfolk.
And do you work in an organization where there is a coaching mindset going on?
Yeah, it's a very collaborative environment.
Wow. That's outstanding. That's outstanding. And do people, I'm curious, I always like to say, I'm very blunt. Would you mind or if I offered some coaching, or would you be open to some coaching? Do people say that in your organization, Jeffrey?
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. I think it's implied, in a lot of ways. The way that we, have our weekly one-on-ones, or we're like, have these off-the-cuff conversations, and they just kind of naturally gravitate towards that coaching, mindset, if you will.
Got it. Got it. I use it because it's like I'm putting up a sign.
Yeah.
Uh, coaching here, 5 cents. Who would you like some coaching? And so I give them, my psychologist friends said, always frame it in terms of would you be open to some? Would you like some? Because then you give them the option of saying no. And there are certainly some times where I did not want coaching from my boss. I was in the middle of a deep struggle that I wanted to figure out on my own. And I didn't want my boss, jumping in and rescuing me and with some coaching. And instead I would say, would you mind if I just tried this on my own, and then if I'm still struggling, I'll come back to you? And they've always said, sure, no problem, won't coach you now. And that seems to work for me. Thank you, Jeffrey, appreciate that. Terrific. So if it's okay for time, I'm going to move on to the next and final shift that you can make. And this is around feedback. We are always, one way or another, giving each other feedback. And traditionally, when people hear that word feedback, they get uncomfortable. And so when I first started working as an executive coach with the Center for Creative Leadership, nearly 15 years ago, they introduced to me a technique that's been around with them since the 1970s. It's called SBI, Situation, Behavior, Impact. And essentially, if you're giving someone feedback, and most commonly you're giving a subordinate feedback about their performance, what you want to do is take them aside and say, would you be open to some feedback? That's my traditional opening. And assuming they say yes, I mean, a subordinate will usually say yes. Then you could say, here's the situation. We've got this, and this going on. And then the B stands for behavior. Here's what I noticed about your behavior. I noticed this, and this. And then finally, the I stands for impact. Now, the impact of that behavior is X, Y, and Z. So one of the biggest challenges that my clients often bring up to me is that they've got somebody on their team who talks a lot, who feels that their input is extremely valuable and they're always giving it. And they say to me, how do I get this person? I do value this person's input. They are interrupting people all of the time. And it's really rude, and people find it disrespectful. How do I give them that feedback? And I said, well, you could use SBI. Here's the situation. Let's say that person's named Greg. Hey, Greg, remember that meeting this morning that we had? And Dennis was there, and Kim was there, and Ellie was there, and Trish Ward was there, and all these folks were there. You remember that meeting? Yes, I remember that meeting. Well, here's some behavior I've observed. You jumped in with your thoughts pretty quickly. Even though Dennis was in the middle of a sentence, you jumped right in on top of him and interrupted him. I also saw it happen with Ellie and Trish and Karen. So here's the impact of that. Dennis feels like he's not being heard. The others feel like they're not being heard. They're feeling disrespected by that behavior. Now, very often, if you give someone that kind of direct feedback using SBI, doing it in a way that they can hear it and take action on it is challenging. They might get defensive. Greg might say, well, I don't know, Dennis talks too much. He won't be quiet. We need to move forward. Dennis is taking too much of our time. And I might say, well, Greg, I hear you. I hear you're frustrated. And I would use the H.E.A.R technique. I can sense the frustration in your voice. And Greg, I respect you for needing to drive the agenda forward. I respect your focus on getting stuff done. That's wonderful. And instead of using but, I would use and. You need to realize the impact that you're having on the other people on the team as you drive for results. And then finally, you could even add an R to the SBI technique. The R stands for request. So I'd like to make a request of you, Gregg. Do you think you could hold off on interrupting folks and instead make some notes about what you need to say and give me a signal? Let me know that you have something to say. And when the time is right, I will come to you. I promise. So that's a very classic way of using the technique that was developed by the Center for Creative Leadership back in the 70s called SBI. And I add an R for making a request. S stands for situation, B stands for behavior, I stands for impact, and R stands for request. And in the middle of that, while the person's becoming defensive, all you need to say is the H.E.A.R technique. Hear the emotion, acknowledge the emotion, and tell them what you respect them for. 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to give them feedback in a way that they'll be able to hear it and take action on it. And they might even say, thank you for that feedback. That really helps me. So these are the 5 shifts that we encourage you to make. We hope these were valuable and useful to you. But let me ask you, are you getting value out of what I've just given you? Has this been helpful to you? Can I see a quick show of hands just so I know I've been helpful to you? Terrific. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. So we have found that organizations that implement these 5 shifts in behavior see increased collaboration between individuals and groups who are genuinely willing to help each other out. Perspectives are valued more. Especially people are respecting each other's points of view, their experiences and ideas. Communication is much more effective and efficient, quite frankly. And we find that there are reduced conflicts and behavioral styles are adapted more often, so people get stuff done faster and better. And finally, there's more respect in general because people are not only respectful of each other's differences, but they're operating according to what we call the platinum rule. We all know the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Our hope is that these are outcomes that you would love to see in your own organization. So today I promised I'd give you some useful data and information. I hope that's what I did, and some techniques that might be, and insights and practices that you could use, shifts you could make within your organizations. And I also mentioned an opportunity for coaching. So you have a choice at this point. You could implement everything I've just taught you, and that's great. That's wonderful. Hopefully it's been useful to you and you can immediately go back to work and start using these things. And if you genuinely feel it would be helpful to you to have an outside perspective, then I'd like to offer you that perspective. Here's how we can help you. If you would point your phone camera at this QR code with my face in the middle of it, and then select a day or a time that you would like to meet with me, that I can help you with some of the challenges you may be facing. All you'll need to do then is answer a few questions, and we will have a 15-minute Zoom call scheduled where we will have a chat. And I will sell you absolutely nothing on that call. I'm just there to help. And it may be valuable help, and you may want to pay me for that help, but I will refuse it. I will not accept your payment on our first call. If I can help you and you would like to discuss more about how I can help you, then we'll set up a separate call and we'll discuss that specifically. Also, you'll find a link to my calendar in the chat. And with that, I just want to open up the floor to anyone who has some thoughts or any questions. And otherwise, we are done. And I just want to thank you all for being here. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
Thank you for this session. It's always great to kind of hear these different perspectives. the intergenerational discussion has been going on for a decade now, as we've
Yes.
seen some shifts in the workplace. And you know, I feel good that I'm a part of a generation that might, though we're small, we're still now in a lot of leadership positions. And I think that that may have helped to pivot some of the dynamics in some workplaces for people who recognize that certain habits weren't as successful in the past. And those who are repeating some of those habits are probably seeing a lot of the attrition, you know, and the turnover in their companies. And that's also very that's alarming as
Yes.
well. So it says
And
a lot.
it's
You know,
also
more people are using Glassdoor and
Yes.
other online tools to give those type of Yelp
Reviews.
feedback and reviews about companies. So people
Yes.
have to be more mindful now in today's ecosystem of information is going out about you in a concerted way. So thank you for sharing this.
Thank you, Yolanda. That was very insightful. Thank you. And Janine, I see your hand raised. Go ahead, Janine.
I do apologize. I do not have a working camera at the moment. I'm having some computer changes in my office versus my home office. So trust me, my face is beautiful and young looking. I wanted to comment on what Wanda said, because I think so much of what we're seeing in the workplace now is because not only do we have so many generations, as Gregg kicked off this call with, in the workplace, but we, for the first time in a while, have a mix of these generations in our leadership teams and our management teams of our organizations. And so that has greatly changed the scope. And that was even changing pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, some things are very much more of a focus because the world stopped and people started thinking about what was important to them. And they came back to work, and in some cases offices, and decided that what they did previously wasn't going to be what they did anymore, or decided, you know what, I can make the same money doing Uber on my own time. I'm going to go do that instead. And so that has transitioned so many things. And to Yolanda's point, we often think about the impact of social media or the impact of immediate news, but we don't think about the impact of that type of communication on our workplaces. An employee who is leaving doesn't even have to be out the door yet, and it's already all over their social media channels if they so chose. And there's nothing that we as an organization or a manager can do about that at that juncture, at that departure time. Now, of course, there's some things we could talk about that you could do, but that's not the topic of today's discussion. So I think it's very important that we remember these things, because it's not just black or white anymore. It's not just old and young or whatever definitions you want to learn. We have a diverse and inclusive leadership organization, whether we like it or not. We have to figure out how to work with it.
Thank you, Janine. Really well said. I'm going to give you applause using American Sign Language. Really well said. Thank you very, very much. And you reminded me of something. When the Great Resignation was first labeled the Great Resignation, I started to research it. My staff and we started to talk about it. And we said, this isn't a great resignation. This is a great reconsideration. People were looking at their lives, looking at their work, and they're saying to themselves, hey, there's more important things. Now that this pandemic has hit, there's more important things than me killing myself in a dead-end job just because it pays me X amount of money. Maybe I need to reconsider my life and what I'm doing. And that's what a lot of people did. And so you're absolutely right. Everything has changed. The pandemic just accelerated that change when it comes to our workforces. And with that,
to that point, Greg, I'll say I was in the Container Store a couple of years ago, like right in the middle of the pandemic, and a gentleman, he had worked for JP Morgan Chase. I think I could say that. And He said he saw a lot of people of his colleagues either committing suicide or having challenges because of, just the pandemic was devastating. It was devastating for people, communities. It's just very devastating. And he decided to go back to school, get a master's of social work, and that's the reason why he was working in the Container Store. He pivoted, he made a change. And so you're seeing a
Wow.
lot of people shift from certain industries to others that before it was said, okay, certain jobs are not coming back, but certain people are not going back to certain jobs.
Good point.
They're looking at other types of opportunities and other ways to make a living.
Good point. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to leave you all with the words of Muhammad Ali, who I met, interestingly enough, when I was a little boy. And because my father was a famous sports writer and he introduced me to him. And Muhammad Ali said to me when I was a child, something I didn't really understand then, but boy, do I understand it now. He said, you respect yourself and you respect other people and you'll do okay. You respect yourself, you respect other people, and you'll do okay. I don't know how better to end a program all about the work that we do here at the Center for Respectful Leadership than with the words of Muhammad Ali. So thank you all very, very much. It's been a great pleasure. I hope to see you on a call soon. And thanks again. Bye-bye.